Hey there fellow guitar slingers, Josh Rogers back again. Today's tutorial is all about scenes, what they are, what they do, what they don't do, and how you can use them to gain maximum benefit from the AX8. Question 1. What are scenes? I like to think of scenes as my basic guitar rig. What I've chosen here is an example of a very generic type guitar rig. So I've put in a wah, drive, chorus, an effects loop down here, amp, cabinet, a couple of delays, and a reverb. A lot of guitarists have a type of system or rig that's very similar to this. This is what I've chosen for the example. How do you set up scenes? I think we can answer that by going back to the first step, which is setting up the preset first. What you need to do is make sure you've got all the effects, amps and cabs inside the preset that you think you're going to need. Because once you've chosen them, you can't change them. You cannot change those within a scene. What you have to do is go back to the preset itself and make sure when you're setting everything up, you've thought ahead and you know which effects and everything that you're going to need. How do you set everything up? I've just set mine up like this. I've got the wah, drive, chorus, etc, etc. Let's move across to scene number 2. In scene number 2, I've decided to turn off the wah and the drive. How have I done that? In wah, I click on right click and I simply choose bypass engage. Here you can see I've turned it on again, so it's engaged. Now I'm going to bypass and it's off. I did the same thing for drive. So you could consider this as my clean second setting. So we've got scene 2, that's what scene 2 is. If we go back to scene 1, everything's involved. Scene 2, that's my clean setting. No wah, no drive, everything else is the same. If we move along to scene 3, I've set this up like the lead channel. So I've got my wah and my drive back on, but I've turned off the chorus. Remember, turning it off was simple as bypass. Scene 4, I have my wah and my chorus off, drive is engaged, and let's just look over here. What's happened to the reverb? Well, I've changed the reverb to Y. How did I do that? Toggle XY. You can find out more about XY switching in one of my other tutorials, which is, it just covers XY switching and tells you how to do that and what the benefits are. Scene number 5, I have disengaged or bypassed one of my delays here. That's pretty simple. There are 3 more scenes available to me. I'm just going to go through and change these in real time so you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm up in scene 6. I haven't really looked into this, but maybe I want a different amp setting. So I'm going to go to my Y and I'm going to bring that on, and I'm going to change my cab to Y. So now when I go up to scene number 6, I've got a different amp, or it might be the same amp but just some different parameters, and a different cabinet, or same cabinet, different parameters. It's up to you, you can do whatever you like. Scene number 7, let's say I'm gonna have no reverb, so I'm just going pretty dry in there, and I'm gonna have no delay. This is super simple. I've got my second guitar coming in through here, I've just got the amp and the cabinet, both in the X settings. Maybe I want to keep that scene 8. There we have, I've got the same setting, but I've engaged delay, reverb. What can scenes do for you? This is probably the most important thing. Once you've learned how to set them up and how to move through them, you need to figure out what can they do for me and where should I use them? Why would I want to use them in a particular situation? Obviously, the most powerful thing that they can do is turn multiple effects, pedals, amps, cabinets on and off however you like. For example, I may not need my wah, drive and chorus in a particular song. If I wanted to do that the old way, like with my analog pedals on the ground, I'd have to press each one. But with a scene, you can choose a scene and they are all off. So if we use my scene number 1, I have everything engaged. If we move to scene number 5, I've turned off a number of different effects: wah, chorus, delay, reverb. They're all off now. If I'd had to do that to the traditional way, that would have involved me pressing each of these. So that would be 4 presses. That could look, that's a bit of a headache actually if you're a guitar player and you've got to do that. So with scenes, it's really easy. You just have to press one button. Depending on how you've set up your foot switches, it could be 2 buttons. You might have to press F2 and then your scene 5 button. Or if you've set up another way, just scene 5 button, and that's it. It's done. 1 tap as opposed to 4. The other thing that it can do for you, it can switch between X and Y states. So if we go to scene number 4, you can see here I've engaged reverb Y. Now you might think, oh, I can just use toggle XY. Yes, you can. Absolutely you can. But what if, for example, you wanted to toggle XY in these 2 delays? That's going to be a lot of foot switching. So what we can do instead, we can set the first delay to Y, set the second delay to Y, and have that as our scene number 4. And then you only have to press 1 button, scene 4, and then you'll have these 3 effects all toggled to the Y setting. Really nice. Another super important thing that scenes can do is they can change the output of each scene. For example, you've changed some of the effects out. You may find either you've had an increase in volume or a decrease. Pressing on the output within a particular scene will allow you to adjust the decibel level of that scene. Let's say this one has come in a little bit lower than it should be and we need it to be at the same volume to say scene 1. So I'm going to just raise that up. This is just arbitrary. So now what we're going to have is scene 4 is at 10 decibels and scene 1 is at 0. You need to adjust this as you go. Every scene's going to be slightly different. You may find you don't need to adjust the decibels at all. It just depends on what's happening. But this is the option that you have. It's fantastic. The next thing that it can do is it can introduce an FX loop. You may find you've got a second guitar coming through here and it's just not loud enough. What can you do? The beautiful thing here, the FX loop has its own main volume slider. So you can adjust whatever is coming through the FX loop. You can adjust its volume separately from everything else. Really, really nice feature. MIDI is also possible to be used here, but I'm not getting into that right now because this is more about just setting up scenes and not MIDI. You may have heard of something called spillover or seamless switching or both. Spillover is like something that carries on after you've turned it off. So for example, you may have your delay running and then you turn it off in the next scene, but you don't want it to sound abrupt, like the delay just disappeared as soon as you went across to the new scene. So let's have a look at how you can make spillover or transitioning from one effect being on to that same effect being off more smoothly. And that is done by selecting either delay or reverb. This is where spillover occurs. It's between these 2 effects here, delay, reverb. And you come down here and you're going to see this, bypass mode. A few options come up. And if you want the delay to spill over, even though you've turned it off in your next scene, choose mute effects in. And that means when the delay has gone off, the effect of that delay will linger for a set amount of time, even though you've turned it off in the next scene. The exact same option applies for reverb. If we come down to the bypass mode, usually the default setting seems to be through. But now we want it to spill over, so we're going to choose mute effects in. And that means when you switch from scene to scene, if your reverb is turned off, in one of these scenes, the effect of it will continue on from the previous scene. One of the important things to remember is that you have to set everything up properly in your original preset. So here I have my original preset, scenes tutorial. We're in scene 1, and this is where you're going to set everything up. So I'm going to use my wah as the example. Here I've got funk wah in the X setting with these parameters, and in Y I've got a Clyde wah with these parameters. Once that's set, you can't change it across all of the scenes. So it will be the same combination X and Y with the same set of parameters across everything. Just bear that in mind. It's not as bad as it sounds. There's still huge amounts of flexibility, but that's what happens in a scene. You can't change the parameters once it's there. What else can't you do? You cannot reroute, so you can't change things around. If you do, it'll change it for everything in here. So just be aware of that. If we wanted to move the chorus to the front, it'll do it for you, but you'll find that that's happened across all of the scenes. That may not be a bad thing, it depends. But just bear in mind that once you've set things up, you should try to keep it that way. Set it up in the most logical manner that suits you and suits your way of thinking when you're switching between effects. This may not make sense for you. You may prefer to have your amp and cabinet at the back here, in a very traditional type setting where all of your effects go into the front of the amp and then out the cabinet. That could be you. That may be how your brain works, how you've gotten used to things over the years. So you can stick with that. That's the beauty of the AX8. It's really flexible. You can't rename each scene. The name that you give your preset is the name that is going to be assigned to all of your scenes. So it doesn't matter if I go to scene 8, it's still scenes tutorial. So just pick a name that makes sense to you, and you might think, oh man, I can't remember what every single scene does. After a while, you're going to get used to it.